Well, Donald Trump is racking up massive US debt, but hey, his economy seems to be doing better than most. And China is also not adverse to a bit of money creation to fund growth. And not just in China, they have expansionist plans that seeing them investing well beyond their borders, whilst countries that don't believe in debt seem to be faring rather worse. So who's got it right? And can the American government and the Chinese really just keep getting itself further and further into debt? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobby. So, Steve, President Donald Trump is running a government debt of over $23 trillion now, but when he came into office, it was $18.2 trillion. So he's just added another $5 trillion onto it. You might imagine that would sort of cause concern in the money markets, but they just brush it off. The government spending increases. I guess, no one's ever going to expect them to default on US dollar bonds, so they just keep on issuing them.
Yeah, I mean, there is no financial limit to the capacity of a government to both create and finance debt in its own currency. It's when you've got to finance, this is the classic point of MMT, it's when you've got to finance in a foreign currency, then you're in trouble. Yeah. Okay. But and what we're seeing with America is so it's only legal impediments that the government puts in its own way that stop it creating indefinite amounts of money. So the debt ceiling was brought in to try to control the level of government debt in the America back in the 70s, I think, and they continue having to vote to increase the level through. And Donald's just rammed right through the whole thing. So if you look at the important metric isn't the actual level of debt, it's debt compared to GDP. And if you take a look at that level, it's currently running at about 100%. Okay. Now, that's as high as it's ever been outside wartime. Yeah. People say, well, there's going to be a point of default, yada, yada, yada. No. It can. And Japan has 240% government debt to GDP, rising from 40% back in 1990.
So everyone can't. So it is all in US dollars, obviously. So
American debt is, yeah.
Yeah. So China and Japan, they've got a lot of US government bonds, but obviously they've bought them in US dollars.
Yeah. Oh well, and that's the reason they've done it. They've got a trade surplus with America, and it's a way of sterilising the impact of that trade surplus on their own currency system. Otherwise, if you get the American dollars in, and you buy. Use them to convert to your local currency, you're boosting the local money supply. Yeah. And that's going to actually cause your currency to rise relative to the dollar.
So how's that happening in actuality? So I'm a Chinese company that's not owned by the government. I'm trading with America. America's paying me. So I'm buying American. They're buying goods from me. They're paying me in US dollars, which is no use to me because I want to pay my workers in the Chinese yuan. So I go to the government converts it to yuan for me?
There's two ways. You can actually directly buy the bonds yourself. Yeah. And I've bought Australian government bonds myself with Australian dollars, obviously, some years ago. So individuals can go and buy it. Predominantly, it's the finance sector that does the buying. And what happens as well is a company which is an industrial company will sell Chinese solar cells to America and in return get American dollars as a payment, and it then transfers those American dollars, takes it to its own bank. They take it in, they pass the dollars on to the central bank and get renminbi in return, and that turns up in the account of the local, which was the way they pay their wages. But it also,
but the central bank's got all these US dollars now,
or they convert them to US bonds. Right. Okay. So you go from non-income earning currency, and just like getting it's actually a database entry these days, to having bonds which at least give you some sort of yield.
But double counted money there, haven't I? Because I've got paid in the US dollars, and the central bank's now converted it to my local currency, but it's still got those US dollars which it's now reinvesting back into America.
It's not adding additional. You're sterile. The idea of it converting into bonds is to sterilise the impact of that increase in currency on your domestic economy.
Right.
Okay. But back to the
up to the tune of $1.1 trillion. It's fair to say that's how much China owes now, which is
if people can say, well, what if China comes along and says we want these bonds we want to convert them to American dollars. Give us $1.4 trillion in return for the $1.4 trillion worth of government bonds we're going to sell to you. Well, the Federal Reserve says, okay, we're going to put the number $1.4 trillion in your bank account, effectively, and put the $1.4 trillion bonds on our bank account. Bang, what else you got?
Yeah.
There's absolutely no limit
effect
for the capacity. So there's no way that's a threat to the American economy. As one way it's seen, the bond vigilante idea. The Federal Reserve can literally buy, and it did, of course, during
So they've got
QE.
no leverage then whatsoever. So, I mean, people say
that doesn't give China any leverage over America. Okay, that's one of the myths people have about it. It's the capacity of the state, the central bank can create as much as it likes.
Yeah.
Literally limitless, because even with other banks have to worry about running out of going to negative equity. So another bank creates a whole lot of money and buys assets with them, and then the assets plunge in value while the liabilities remain constant. They can get into negative equity and you're bankrupt. It doesn't happen to a central bank.
So just as and this is why the numbers keep on getting bigger and bigger then. So just as the central bank in America can create money and issue bonds, similarly in China, they can create money to convert those US dollars, which enables the buying of American bonds. There's money creation happening on both sides. As you're saying, on the Chinese side, they're not expanding their money supply because they're using it to buy American bonds. In effect, they're adding to the American money supply. So that's why you can play this game where you're starting to play with exchange rates through all of this.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is, if you want to reduce the government debt level, how do you do it? Now, the linear way of thinking is you simply reduce the amount of debt. Okay, and the whole obsession about cutting government debt, like this is hitting with Boris Johnson again right now, because he's arguing they want to reduce government spending to make up for some of the stimulus happening in other parts. So all departments are told to find a way they can cut their budget by 5%. And the vision that gives you is that if you want to reduce the government debt to GDP ratio, you simply reduce the debt. Now, there's two problems with that, and I've actually identified this in this cartoon book I've just finished writing, ironically enough. I'd seen the effect once before in a government submission I made, which the bloody bureaucrats lost internally after I submitted the submission to a financial services inquiry before the Theresa May election. But if you cut debt by, say, you run a surplus, okay, and you use all the surplus to pay your debt level down, then your debt level falls by the surplus. Now, that's the numerator of your debt to GDP ratio. What's your denominator? The denominator includes the value of the government deficit. The output, the GDP is defined as consumption plus investment plus government spending minus taxes plus exports minus imports. Now, if G minus T is a surplus, so taxes are greater than government, you've reduced the GDP by precisely as much as you reduce the debt. And that's not where it ends, because when you have a government taxing more than it spends, then that's taking money out of the economy. Quite literally, it's exactly what it does. And that reduces the amount of money in circulation. And if that money turns over, let's say, twice a year, then you don't just reduce your GDP by the surplus, you reduce it by the surplus plus twice the surplus. So you end up, a $1 reduction in the debt level can cause a $3 reduction in GDP, and by running a surplus, you can increase the government's debt to GDP ratio.
So does that mean that governments can just keep on borrowing willy-nilly forever? That US debt could just keep on going? And does it mean everyone else could do the same, like the UK could just not worry about the cost of the HS2, or, for example, not care about the cost of treating the coronavirus, just borrow away? Well, to hear the answer to those questions, you need to listen to the full version of this podcast, and to do that, you need to become a subscriber of the Debunking Economics podcast at debunkingeconomics.com, or become a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof. Steve Keen. Back again with another one next week. I'm Phil Dobbie. He's Steve Keen. Thanks for listening.